Hello, I'm Roger Yott, a current elder serving as clerk of session at FPCA. My wife and I have been members of FPCA since 1989 and have been actively involved in the life of our church in a number of different ways since then. Welcome to our Lenten daily prayer services. My assigned question today is, Jesus was tempted in the wilderness. What distractions in your life pull you off center? How can you return to having God as your center? Perhaps the place to begin answering this question is to set the physical stage for the temptations of Jesus in the desert, as described in the Gospels of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Many of you, like me, might picture the wilderness as an area of lots of trees and wild animals. However, this is not the case for the wilderness in Israel. The temptations of Jesus take place near Jericho, which is also near the Jordan River. This picture might give you a better sense, ignoring the vehicles and the roads, of the rugged terrain and lack of vegetation around Jericho. At the time of Jesus, the wilderness was home to wild animals such as bears, leopards, snakes, and wolves, just to name a few. Jerusalem, where the temple is located, is some 17 miles from Jericho. The traditional baptismal site where John the Baptist baptized Jesus is some 3 miles east of Jericho on the Jordan River, as shown in this picture. The traditional Mount of Temptations lies some 3 miles to the west of Jericho, as shown in this picture. From the summit, you get a panoramic view of the Jordan Valley, the Dead Sea, and the mountains of Moab and Gilead. Let's quickly look at the Bible story of Jesus' temptations as recorded by Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Following Jesus' baptism, the Spirit leads him into the wilderness where he fasts for 40 days prior to the start of his public ministry. During this period, he is tempted a number of times by the devil. By the way, this is the first place the devil, Satan, is introduced in the Gospels, with 3 temptations specifically described that may have all occurred on the 40th day. To each of the 3 temptations of Jesus by the devil, Jesus responds with quotes from the book of Deuteronomy. The devil told Jesus, who is very hungry, to turn the stones into bread to satisfy his hunger. Jesus responded, "It is written that man does not live by bread alone." Matthew continues, "but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." The devil led Jesus to Jerusalem. Here he took him to the highest point in the temple. This is a scale model of the temple at the time of Christ. Where he asked Jesus to throw himself down. The devil said, "It was written that God will command his angels concerning you, and they will lift you up in their hands so that you will not strike your foot against a stone." Jesus responded, "Do not put the Lord your God to the test." The devil took Jesus to a very high mountain, or a place from which all the kingdoms appeared in an instant, according to Luke. The devil said, "All this I will give you if you will bow down and worship me." Luke adds that the devil said to Jesus, "I will give you all their authority and splendor, for it has been given to me, and I can give it to anyone I want. So if you worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus responded, "Away from me, Satan. Worship the Lord your God and serve him only." Luke adds that the devil left Jesus until an opportune time. One modern-day definition of temptation is the desire to do something, specifically something wrong or unwise. For example, you have a medical condition and your doctor strongly advises against eating certain foods, but you're on vacation and the certain food looks so good that you are tempted to ignore your doctor's warnings and eat it just this one time. Another definition is a thing or course of action that attracts or tempts someone. Think of the times we each try to convince or tempt someone to do something that they probably shouldn't really do. Finally, I thought back to an experience I had following a session meeting pre-COVID. After our meeting ended, we were headed to our cars. I noticed a man wandering near the door. Every session member so far had walked past him as if he didn't exist. When I came out, I was sorely attempted to ignore him since it was dark, late, and why should someone be wandering around our parking lot? I felt an inner voice saying to me, you could ignore him like the rest of session members. Probably a safe thing to do this late at night. Or you could see what he wanted. I thought to myself that Jesus would have talked with him. I summoned a bit of courage and asked him if I could help him. He looked very relieved that someone coming out of a church building would actually talk to him. His story was simple. He had just started a job and was going to carpool with a friend to work. His problem was that the friend wanted a contribution towards gas. He said he really needed to get to work the next day, but didn't have as much money as his friend had asked for. Was his story true? Well, I don't really know. What I remember is an inner voice saying Jesus would have given him some money, whether his story was true or not, so that's what I did. He thanked me and then said I was the only person coming out of our church building who stopped to help him. Next, he wanted to know which direction Allentown was from our church so he could walk home. As you can see, I was tempted to ignore him, but overcame that temptation and helped him. Later, it occurred to me that he came to FPCA thinking, what better place to turn to for help than from a church? Maybe I'm right, and maybe I'm wrong. Biblical scholars have a different perspective on temptation. One source said that temptation in the Bible primarily denotes a trial in which man has a free choice of being faithful or unfaithful to God. Only secondarily does it signify allurement or seduction to sin. Many commentaries suggest that the three specific temptations Jesus was faced with are a condensed version of what every human being goes through in the course of a lifetime. Here is one perspective. Turning rocks into bread would achieve instant gratification, but would not be submitting to God's will. Restated, Jesus obeyed God even though it meant suffering from great hunger and weakness. Asking Jesus to jump from the high point on the temple without fear of touching the ground because God will send his angels to keep him from hitting the ground would test God. Restated, Jesus would not test God, and neither should we. In the story, Jesus is offered a shortcut to his kingdom that skips the suffering and dying part if only he will worship the devil once. Restated, as Christians, Jesus reminds us that we are not to worship false gods, like, for example, money, only the one true God. So how do we resist temptation? We need to strive to recognize what temptation is in its many forms and trust that when faced with temptation, God will always help us find a way to avoid it if we want to follow that way. So what is your understanding of temptation? Can you think of some examples in your life when you were tempted or tried to tempt another? What actually happened? In reflecting on temptation, how might you recognize a future temptation? How might you avoid succumbing to it? Please join me in praying. Jesus, from time to time we are all faced with temptations from a variety of sources. Many sound enticing to us. Help us more easily identify temptations that lead us away from you, then give us the strength and insight to recognize these temptations for what they are. Finally, give us the courage not to succumb to them and instead return to listening to your word and following you. Amen. Have a wonderful rest of your day.